Seriously. Were you, oh, I don't know if you were here, but he's like squishy, crunchy water bottles. I got it for you. Thank you. I got it.
Is that against the rules? I could, there you go. Oh, it's for the photos. Yeah, he doesn't like. Hi, I'm Maggie. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. And hey, team, you can all pour your own water.
Oh, that's a good point. When you switch, it's okay if you're thirsty.
I will not touch
You take a sip.
I
I'll allow
promise.
it. Oh, Kareem. Kareem? Nice to meet you.
I'm telling you.
Okay. Okay. Although, yeah, this is tough right after lunch.
Chris, you think ready to roll, my friend? Okay, everybody, how we doing? All right, last afternoon, thank you for coming in and being with us here this afternoon. My name is Tim Wright, and I work with Enertech Global. We're a geothermal heating and cooling manufacturer based out of Illinois, and then we also manufacture product in Mitchell, South Dakota. So I have the awesome privilege of being the moderator of the Fabulous Four right here. I will tell you that we did a little prelim last week, and I wish I would have recorded it because it was a lot of fun. And I thought, if that is the conversation and that's the energy that comes through, you're going to have an awesome time. So first of all, thank you for being in this room, and I know that you'll get a lot out of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll through pretty quick. So my job's to moderate, their job is to present incredible information. So that's what we're going to do here. So first of all, sock check. Everybody got their good socks on today? No. I will tell you, when you check out your socks, the domestic content is fantastic. It's fantastic. All right, we're going to get rolling here. So first of all, we have got an incredible group here. So we're going to start off, and we've done this in order. So Bob Wyman is going to go first. I don't think Bob needs really any introduction to this group. He has been an incredible resource to our industry. Super thankful for Bob. So what Bob's going to do is he's going to provide the backstory. So we all know what happened. Section 48 of the ITC for commercial was untouched. 25D, it was touched. It was taken away. And this is what Bob is, I think, incredibly gifted to be able to share, is did it shake the industry? Yes. Should it? I'm not going to answer that. Bob will. Bob will answer that. Should we be concerned? So I'm super excited for Bob to be able to roll through here. Then next we're going to go to Kareem, Mirza. Kareem with Ecotherm Renewables, focusing on long-term geothermal and HVAC infrastructure for large buildings. So you'll see here, we're trying to just give you some diversity in what the panelists will present today. Holly, all the way from the West Coast. Welcome to the East Coast, Holly. Good to have you here. Holly Braun from NW Natural, leveraging utility decarbonization mandates to convert gas customers. Wow, we did hear that right. Convert gas customers to using geothermal for third-party ownership. Exciting. And then last, we've got Maggie that's going to close us out. Very excited to hear what Maggie McCrary is going to be able to share from Dandelion Energy. Super excited about that. Forging ahead to unlock builder adoption through TPO and the federal ITC. So with that, I'm getting out of the way. Bob, you're up, my friend. Just that right arrow.
Okay, first, let me just say, this is really cool because I've been waiting over a decade to give this presentation, or at least waiting for someone else to give it, but to be able to say that finally, after all these years, we can actually do third-party ownership for geothermal. And I personally think it's going to introduce us to an entirely new era of the business. you know, we've always known from the day one, the first day I ever heard about geothermal, everybody said the same thing. It's the reason geothermal isn't being adopted is the upfront capital cost is too high. A lot of people who who desperately need a lower cost of energy, particularly low and moderate income people, they simply can't afford to have the cheap technology, the cheapest way to heat and cool their homes. Now with the geothermal leasing, we're finally able to remove individuals of that third party, of that upfront cost. And it's taken a lot of work, and it's not just me, but there are guys like Tim Weber at Diverso and the rest. I remember what he was talking before about back in 2014, we started working this issue here in the States, different up in Canada. But down here, we had these IRS regulations that prevented the leasing. We finally were able last July to do something extraordinary, and that is to get an exception from the traditional IRS rules concerning leasing just for geothermal heat pumps. There are a vast number of other kind of technologies, et cetera, in the economy, people who would love to have that exception. Geothermal heat pumps are the only one, only kind of equipment in the world that you can, at least for Americans, that have that exception from the IRS rules. And I'll explain the problem in a minute. But essentially what happened last July with the passage of the OBBA, or the one big bad terrible bill that had this beautiful little diamond buried among a pile of muck, was we got some really good stuff for the industry. Most importantly, Section 48 wasn't modified, at least not significantly. They were a little bit, but not modified, even though Section 25D credits went away. Everybody knows about that. The cool thing for us was that in Section 50, we got an exception from the limited use property rules. Those rules had essentially said, if you're going to lease something to somebody, you have to be able to take it back at the end of the lease, okay? Because it has to have some value when you take it back. So this is why if you've ever tried to lease a car, you know, you can't get a car lease for 10 years or 15 years or something. They'll give you a car lease for 3 or 5 years, and then you have to get a new lease. The reason they're doing that is because at the end of the lease, they're required to take the thing back and to prove it has some market value. The difficulty is if you dug a hole in the ground and you stuck a pipe in it, okay, at the end of the lease, the lessee might say, I don't want to pay the lease charges anymore. You can't take your hole back, okay? And you're not going to pull the pipe out. So essentially, you leave the property, the guy can continue using your hole in the ground with the pipe in it. You might have some contracts and stuff, but essentially, once you put a hole in the ground, it's there for its life. And the IRS would say that from their point of view, that was not a lease. You may have said it was a lease, but that's essentially a sale, okay? And because it's a sale, you don't own it for tax purposes. You may own it as far as law is concerned, but for tax purposes you don't, and since you don't own it, you can't depreciate it, you can't get tax credits on it, you can't, you know, because the IRS says it's not yours. Now, the weird thing is, it's not the building owners either. See, because to be able to get tax credits, you have to be able to prove you own a thing. But if the building owner goes to the IRS and says, well, there's this guy who leased me this equipment, you say it's not his, that means it must be mine, the IRS's response is, no, actually, he is the owner of that equipment. So we can't even get to the question of who's the owner for tax purposes because we already know that for the owner for like just normal property reasons, he's the owner. So essentially, if you have it used to be if you had a third-party owned system, nobody got tax credits. Nobody could depreciate the equipment, and that made it a really bad business. The other thing that happened in the big bad bill was 100% bonus depreciation up front. That means instead of having to depreciate your assets over 5 years or 15 or 20 or whatever it might be, you can depreciate them up front immediately if you'd prefer to do that, which means that the present value of the depreciation goes up tremendously. So now with the tax credits that we have, you can get up to 50% off the tax credits, and then you essentially get another, depending on how you do it, you can get another like 10% or so off the value of the depreciation, bringing the total tax benefit of the deal up to as much as 60% of the total value of the installed system. That is a tremendous benefit for people, and it truly cuts down that capital cost, not just for the customer, but for the third party as well. And then there's this weird thing that we put in as well, and it's master limited partnerships. Or I think it's in the law, it's like certain rules for certain publicly owned partnerships. MLPs are this weird structure. You know, everybody knows partnerships are taxed differently than corporations, okay? And partnerships don't sell stock, say, on the New York Stock Exchange, except some of them do, MLPs do. In a partnership, what happens is the partnership will make a lot of money, then it distributes its profits to its partners, and the partners pay their taxes as they pay personal taxes, but the partnership doesn't pay tax. It's the partners who pay tax. Well, this means that there's no double taxation. You don't have a corporate tax followed by a personal tax. You only have the personal tax. And traditionally, the ability to have a publicly traded partnership, in other words, a partnership that can sell stock, okay, has been limited pretty much to oil and gas pipelines. Of course, why? Well, because they've got very good lobbyists, and they can figure out how to get the law changed to benefit them, and getting rid of corporate tax is a thing they like. Now, so that's bothered me all the way through, because there are hundreds of billions of dollars on the stock exchanges of oil and gas pipelines that are essentially tax-free, publicly traded partnerships, but none of the renewable energy technologies were able to benefit from that same sort of implicit subsidy. So what we've done is we've changed the law so that now geothermal systems are able to use the same preferred structure that oil and gas pipelines. So if you were going to set up a thermal energy network at 10, as if you're operating geothermal equipment, you can now, that will generate qualified income for a master limited partnership. So you can set up your thermal energy network as a tax-free entity. The taxes essentially, it's based on, it goes through like a normal MLP as dividends to the shareholders. And that's significant. Now, the utilities, for a variety of reasons, they may not want to play that game, but if anybody wants to have a non-utility 10, I would seriously suggest that you look at it as an MLP, because you'll save yourself a lot of money. Also, there's a tremendous segment of the market that just specializes in MLP trading and such, and those guys are nervous because they think their gas and pipeline MLPs are probably going to go away in the future. So they're essentially over on Wall Street. There are thousands of people who specialize in MLP trading who are now going to be very excited to see a whole new kind of MLP asset come into the market. And they'll pay a lot of attention to it and see it as the future of their business. Just want to briefly, point out the reason the third-party ownership is so important is because, there are a lot of people that just simply cannot take that 20, 40K or more for single-family homes, that upfront capital cost. They don't have the money in the bank. They don't have the credit or whatever. Now we're able to do just like what the solar guys did. One of the things that first got me excited about this idea was looking at the history of what Jigar Shah did in the solar business. And he basically kicked off the solar business, got it to explode by coming in and saying the problem's not technology, the problem is we got to figure out a way to cut back on the upfront capital costs, and the way we do that in solar is by having third-party ownership. He didn't have the limited use problem because at the end of a lease, somebody doesn't want to renew the lease, you can take the panel off the roof. But my hope is that third-party ownership will cause the geothermal business to explode in just the same way that the solar business exploded after Jigar Shah introduced the power purchase agreement to solar. I want to introduce just one caveat. I'm getting close to the end of my time, and that is that the IRS, bless their souls, okay, has decided to, like just throw a wrench into things. And they came up, in 2024, they came up with this new rule that defined this thing called a unit of energy property. They essentially said you have to own both the heat pump and the ground loop in order to get the tax credits. This is not something that is in the law. This is an invention of a bunch of guys in the IRS building who decided to simplify the law for themselves. The law talks about geothermal equipment. It talks about other things. It talks about our systems. It's a standard rule of statutory interpretation that when two different words are used in the same text, okay, that you should assume that Congress had different meanings for them. The IRS has said, we're going to treat systems and equipment as though they were the same word. And since a geothermal system is a bunch of pieces of equipment, we're going to say you have to have all of those pieces of equipment in order to get the tax credits, but the law only says you have to have equipment. And so the way the law is written is you can either have a ground loop or you can have a heat pump. You don't have to have both to get the tax credits. The industry needs to get itself organized to go fight this, get the IRS to back off and do what the law says instead of what they think is a cool idea. Then we will be able to just lease a ground loop or just lease a heat pump independently, and that'll be a real benefit to everybody. I just want to, here basically, the law says equipment. The IRS should follow the law. We need to figure out as an industry how to get them to do that. And then just one last thing, we're missing out on a tremendous source of capital in this business because you probably know that virtually all the large buildings in the country are owned by REITs. In fact, this building, I would guess, is probably owned by a real estate investment trust as well. Because they're set up as a special, once again, tax-free kind of structure to own real estate. A ground loop, which typically will be installed in an easement, which is an interest in real property, and you put a pipe in it, that's an improvement to an interest in real property. A ground loop should be considered real property for all purposes. However, the IRS has a rule that says that if you put an HVAC system into a building, a REIT can only own that HVAC system if it owns an equivalent interest in the building itself, okay? Which is, once again, not what the law says. The law says if you have real property, a REIT is allowed to invest in it. We need to get this law changed, and if we do that, we will create a tremendous spigot of capital that will come in from all of the many, many REITs in the country where they'll see, aha, here's another kind of real property, a non-depreciating asset, a non-wasting asset that would be a really great investment for REITs. So anyway, the wonderful thing is, after all these years, finally been able to say, you know, geothermal third-party ownership is here, and let's all take advantage of it, please.
All right. Kareem, come on up. All right. Thank you, Bob. Outstanding. You think you might have a few answers to some of your questions later on? We want to get through the panels, and then we want time for your questions. Kareem, come on up.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. Wrong way. My name is Kareem Mirza. I am the founder of a company called Ecotherm, relatively young company, founded in November of 2024. And we were bought by Renova Partners. They're an infrastructure fund based out of Greenwich, Connecticut, and they have offices in London, UK as well. We were purchased by them in June. Within a span of so what we do fundamentally is third-party ownership of geothermal and HVAC. So we own all of the in-building heating, ventilation, and cooling equipment from the pipes all the way to the distributed heat pumps, makeup air units, the whole thing. And if the building also has geothermal, we will also own the geothermal loops in the ground. In some cases, some of our projects, we don't actually own any geothermal at all. We just own the HVAC infrastructure. And we sell that as a service to the building. Within a very short period of time, we were able to build a pipeline of $250 million, mostly multifamily homes, so high-rise and mid-rise residential buildings, and in two cases, some hotels and resorts, of which we have $150 million under contract. 2 in Burlington, Vermont, which don't include geothermal, they're air source heat pump buildings, 2 in Illinois that we're currently working on that do include geothermal, and 1 that we're working on right now in Kauai, which is surprisingly also a geothermal system at the old Cocoa Palms Resort. So what I'm here to talk about today is not really much more about the company or even about Renova Capital Partners. Mostly just want to talk about the model that we have that enables this. Because we were able to underwrite the entire HVAC and geothermal capital stack for developers without the tax credits. The tax credits have allowed us to make a little bit more money and also share some of that money with the developer to make the offering that much more attractive. But before I get into that, let me just take a quick step back. Some of you may have seen me before. I used to represent a company called Subterra Renewables. Subterra was from the great state of Canada, and they were making. I was hired as their chief revenue officer to come in and make a big push into the U.S. And you may have, if you've heard Tim Weber speak, if you'd heard from Brian Erlab earlier from Salas O'Brien, the Canadian market is fundamentally different than the American market. In Canada, geothermal is well adopted in most major city centers, and the third-party ownership model is well understood. You had, at the time at least, 3 companies. Subterra is no longer really a going concern, but you had 3 companies, Diverso, Geosource, and Subterra, all offering a third-party ownership model effectively just for the ground source, just for the bore field, right? So they would own typically the bore field up to a plate heat exchanger. The rest of it was owned by the building. And that was a well-understood model. Typically, it would be underwritten to a 10% unlevered IRR. And that is something that most building developers, high-rise and mid-rise condominium developers, as well as those building apartments that are for lease, they understood it well, and it was readily adopted. And the value was quite low. And that was because most of the folks that were underwriting this on the infrastructure fund side, although they were underwriting it to a 10%, 9 to 10% unlevered IRR, debt is very cheap in Canada. So they were able to go ahead and put a lot of leverage on this, typically 70% out of the gate, and then they would actually sell the forward contract on a DSCR basis, which effectively meant they were getting all of their forward value up front, such that their levered returns would go up to around 19 to 21%. Very easy product, easy to manage, easy to get out from a financial perspective, and well adopted. Now, I was trying to bring that same product to the US. I started this in 2022. And within 2 years, I had sold nothing. There was zero market penetration whatsoever here in the US, specifically with developers of multifamily homes and hotels and resorts. And that's because their motivations are very different. So I feel like everybody, we're all in here in a bit of an echo chamber talking about efficiency and how wonderful geothermal is. But the average developer, especially the average merchant developer, does not care. All they really care about is increasing their bottom line. When I was chatting with them, most of the time, all they really wanted to know was, how are you going to reduce my cost, not increase my cost? They thought, okay, cool, new product, geothermal, awesome, great for operating cost, but I care more about my capital stack today. In Canada, the same developer would get 90 to 95% debt to build their building, 90 to 95% leverage at subsidized interest rates, so 4 to 5%, with a 50-year amortization period. Same situation over here. The same developer is going to get max 60% leverage, loan to cost, typically at 9 to 11% interest rate, with a very, very short amortization period, typically 5 years max. Equity in Canada was extremely cheap. So when these buildings were going up, equity was being sold for between 14 and 16%. Here, if you have a $100 million building, you're getting $60 million of debt, you have to raise $40 million of equity. Equity is going for, on a levered basis, somewhere between 22 and 28%. So, and it's hard to come by. So the point that I'm making, though, is that in all of this, the concern was, yeah, everybody wants the tax credits. They leveled the playing field a little bit, right? They were able to go ahead and reduce some of the upfront cost, but it's missing the point. These guys are value engineering their HVAC system to reduce cost, to reduce the amount of equity they have to raise, not the other way around. So our approach is, again, fundamentally different. Where we are able to add value is we are going to, by owning the in-building HVAC infrastructure, above and beyond the geothermal, we're able to take value out of their equity raise, So using a $100 million example, for argument's sake, let's assume that $10 million is the HVAC infrastructure. We are going to put that $10 million upfront into the building, participating in their capital stack in a way that does not reduce their loan to cost. We have to underwrite that. Without the tax credits, the best you could underwrite that to is between 9 and 10%. Typically 9.5 is where you're going to get clients in. Amortization needs to be long, so we're amortizing it between 30 and 40 years. And what that meant for the developer is that's $10 million less equity they have to raise. So their equity adjusted returns just shot through the roof. And that's how we were able to go ahead and get clients quite excited about this, to enable the entire thing. So in what that is doing with the OB3A, what the tax credits have enabled is for us to take something that we were underwriting to between, call it 9.5%, and add about 100 basis points to that. So we're able to go ahead and add about roughly 50 to 100 basis points to our return. We're sharing about 50% of the benefit with the building owner. So that roughly equates to a roughly 10 to 15% reduction in the rate that we otherwise would be able to charge them. And for them, that was something that actually was meaningful. But I think it's very important to note that that wasn't the decision-making factor. It's all in the structuring, and it's all in the ability to have patient capital. We still own the system. So again, although we are putting our capital up front into the building stack, our property is delineated from the building very clearly. We have non-disturbance agreements, and we have to sign a subordination agreement, but we have non-disturbance agreements signed with their lenders to ensure that that is our property. So these are the things that the equity folks care about to ensure that their property is secure, that they have the right security in place. But the reason I'm sharing this at a very somewhat technical level, I suppose, is because if we want to see more proliferation in this space of third-party ownership, in particular in the multifamily home and the hotel sector, and possibly other sectors as well, we need to appreciate, what do those who are building these buildings want to see? Again, not profit, governmental stuff, totally different motivations. But the merchant developer world, those who are developing for profit, very different motivations. And then also, we have to be able to educate the lending side of the equation and the equity side of the equation to be able to get comfortable with parking their money into a building up front, typically waiting 2 to 3 years for yield for something that you have very little control over when it comes to timeline. So the more that we can get folks on the equity side in particular, so the infrastructure funds of the world, comfortable with this structure, the more we will see other competing firms to Ecotherm pop up and be able to make this more commonplace. You're not going to be able to make 12 to 15% unlevered in this market, right? 9 to 10% is a very reasonable return. You're not going to be able to just put your money into a building that's going to have yield immediately. That's just not going to happen. But it is addressing the need of having more proliferation of electrification, and especially geothermal, in these buildings, in the built environment, in this market. So anyway, I basically didn't talk about my slides at all. So I hope these are available afterwards. I have something in here about risk and risk management, who owns the risk, that sort of thing. Not terribly exciting. The model is what I really wanted to get out to folks. So those who are trying to understand how they're going to underwrite this, this is the way to go. So with that, I'll stop talking. Thank you very much.
Ms. Holly, please come up. Thank you. There you go.
All right. Thank you.
There you go. Get this out of your way.
Okay.
And then there's that, or the arrow down.
Okay, thank you. All right, how many of you have been camped out in Salon D for the last 2 days? Not that many. Okay, I was kind of yeah, of course. I was kind of expecting to be more of the room, so I wasn't going to repeat one of my slides. I might need to now. Holly Braun with Northwest Natural. Yesterday I shared about what we are doing for thermal energy networks in the state of Washington. So geothermal in new construction, networked systems, Washington State. This is Oregon, standalone, retrofits, residential. So 2 different stories, 2 different programs and offers. The other one is also much further along. This is more in concept form. But operating in 2 different states, we have different legislation in each state, We have different regulatory structures, different price on carbon. And so I think to the point Kareem was just making, really understanding the motivations and the subtleties in the context, and sometimes not as subtle, is essential to shaping a program that will ultimately be successful. So these are two quite different designs. And I'm really excited about this one. 10s are awesome and fascinating, but they're hard, they're complex, they're very, very expensive. On the standalone, as I think you're starting to see and feel, that the business model is more straightforward, especially now. And in order for us to scale, and I am intensely motivated to figure out decarbonization at massive scale, it's slow working inside the utility, but the upside is when you finally get there and you like unlock the special code, we've got 800,000 customers. So if you can figure out an offer, those aren't all in Oregon, they're not all residential, so let's say 500,000 residential customers in Oregon. If we can figure out a model that's best for the customer, best for the utility, and truly decarbonizes, like the sky's the limit. You know, you can go after all of them. So it does help me to persevere in the slow pace of a utility, knowing that once we get this lined up, like you get the shot lined up, you know, let's go and we can really transform a market. All right. I'm still not going to go through this slide because I know we're going to run out of time. And I did it yesterday, but you see a map of our service territory. It just gives you a sense of scale. I will highlight that in Oregon, the cost per ton of carbon, the bogey to hit is $136 a metric ton. We have very steep carbon reduction mandates, so it's 80% by 2050 and 50% by 2035 based on 1990. That's probably not true, 1990. Gosh. Maybe it's 2000. I wasn't even going to share these numbers. So I think, let's say 2000. It doesn't matter. They're amazingly steep reductions. And so our options are renewable natural gas. It's just shedding load. But then what are you going to do? Maybe geo. And then these carbon offsets. And offsets, you know, are they actually going to result in carbon reduction? Where if we can get our customers to install geothermal, it truly is carbon reduction, but in a way that would allow our company to still invest in pipe. So that's a little foreshadowing. We aren't passing around a mic right now, so this question doesn't fit right here, so I'll just have to tell you. But an investor-owned utility, and I don't think this is unique to Oregon and Washington, we don't make money on the gas. The gas it's just a pass-through. So we recover the cost, but we don't make money on it. I can't ask you because you don't have a mic. We make money on the capital we're investing. So it's all on that pipe. And because we are a monopoly, we have this oversight. I mean, it's just the regulatory structure. And so all of our costs, this gets to the second question, all of our expenditures have to be considered least cost, least risk, or we can't put them in rates. So you have all your expenses. The commission says, okay, you get a 9.4% return on that investment, as long as all those investments are determined prudent, which is least cost, least risk. So if you have some cool, innovative idea, but it's not least cost, least risk, you won't get recovery on that, or you have to make a really good case. Vermont Gas has a $2 million innovation fund, so they can do all kinds of cool things because they've gotten approval for it. Most utilities don't have that. So unless we can come up with products that meet that bogey, the $136 a metric ton, then we risk a lot of recovery risk is there. So the hurdles to overcome, gosh, how much time do I have? I do want to be tracking a little. 6 minutes. Okay, I think we're doing well. And these are really just like internal within a utility to start with, that there is, we don't want to own the equipment inside the house. And we know in order to get the tax credit, and we need to put all of the funds on the table because, you know, these projects are expensive. And we do not want to own the equipment inside people's homes. I think that's overcomable, but at least for now, there's just like, oh, that's so different. We don't want that. So just noting that. Cannibalizing our current load. So if we take a gas customer and we convert them over to GEO, well, wait a minute, we're not selling them as much gas. And we don't make money on the gas, but throughput through your system still matters. And then I think some of the cannibalization even connects to this other point that in our identity, the way we see ourselves, we are a gas utility. And I had a few conversations, and I realized I think we need to keep having them in boardrooms around, are we a gas company or are we a thermal company? I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we make money on the pipe, the underground infrastructure. We deliver heat. We could deliver cooling. And so people they're getting their head around it more and more, so that's good. But it is a shift after many, many, many years. And I've already mentioned that if we do something that's determined too risky and there's disallowance, that is a showstopper, because then shareholders would have to eat that, and that just is not okay. There's also risk of not moving forward with GEO. Customers are electrifying, but we're not part of that equation. So if they're just putting in air source heat pumps, sometimes on top of gas, sometimes getting rid of gas, that's happening, kind of more on an ad hoc or chaotic basis. We are not in control of our destiny in that way, and so that is a risk of the gas load going down without us being at the table with investment. And then fewer therms going through the system increases rates over time. More customers don't want to pay those rates. They get off the system, death spiral, you guys know that. Okay, so here's the proposal concept. 4 minutes? What are we at? I haven't seen this. So I should be keeping track myself. 3 and change. Okay, so here's the exciting part that I think we're finally threading the needle. We're finding our way through. So we will engage a third party to install and own ground source heat pumps and the ground loop and the ground source heat pumps for 5 years. That will enable us to get the ITC, for the ITC to be factored into all of this without us having to own the in-unit equipment. I think I needed this bullet up to make that make more sense. So the third party will claim the ITC, and they will assume the risk for the in-unit equipment. So then the utility doesn't need to, have that on our worry list if they're doing that. And in this so I'm looking at this for about 100 units to start and to really test this out and prove the model. Got it, thank you. And then, okay, I think I got a little, sorry. That this third party, what we want to do is take 100 units. And again, this is concept, and this is just to get everybody over a hurdle and realize maybe this isn't so scary. The third party will project manage, will own and install the 100 units for 5 years. After the 5 years, we will actually buy back that package, but it will not include the ground source heat pump. And I'm jumping ahead, so I'll follow on this bullet. Northwest Natural will pay that third party for the carbon reduction. So $136 a metric ton equates to about $6,000 a system on a 2 to 3 ton ground source heat pump system. As that scales, that amount goes up. So the third party gets the $6,000 from us roughly, plus whatever interest they're able to charge for the customer. And then we will be collecting that money from the customer, that monthly amount that they need to be made, that the third party needs to be made whole on the bill that we're sending the customer. And then the third party, this investment firm, doesn't need to deal with 100 different individual residential customers. They're dealing with the utility as their customer, and then we collect those every month and remit that back to the third party. So that keeps them having this durable customer that they need, and I think it answers for the other concerns that we have, except in those first 5 years, we're not earning anything. We are getting decarbonization, but for us to earn, we would then buy back the portfolio after that hefty depreciation has happened, and then transfer the ownership of the in-unit equipment to the homeowner. And we would then continue to own the ground loop and charge the customer a monthly amount to be connected to the ground loop. All right, 1 minute. So I've already decided what I'm going to skip to make this work. Okay, we did a pilot of 12 homes. So we got to test out this concept. These customers still had gas. We can talk at a different point why these customers still have gas. It is not a full conversion over. And we were able to validate the user experience. The bill savings echoed what we had modeled. And this was really great. Instead of just onesie twosie, when you do 12 at a time, you can actually reduce the cost. We saw 15% cost savings by batching the work and being able to buy the 12 units all at once. And then we also were looking at how do you scale this. So doing 12 was one thing, and there was a lot of hand-holding and, so much customer interaction. And so how do we do this at a much larger scale? And so part of our evaluation was assessing that. And even in those evaluations, working with the energy efficiency community, who typically is like, ground source too expensive, they haven't really had it on their radar. They were at the table reviewing all these reports with us, and we saw a lot of changed hearts and minds on the concept of ground source heat pump, which was great. And this was going to be a timeline of how long it takes, but the progress we've made in getting this done. The summary will be 26, we're working on the RFP, refining the concept, getting all of the modeling just right, and then 27, we'd like to install the first 100 units. The end. Oh, the end, we're like trying to create the future we imagine. Like, we need to be in charge of our own destiny instead of like, oh, these things happen to us. This is a slide that our CEO likes to use, and I feel like GEO is one of the best ways that we're actually creating the future we imagine. So on that, thank you.
Okay, Miss Maggie from Dandelion, come on up, please. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I feel like that was a good slide to end on, but I'll keep going. And props to all the panelists for making this platform look much sturdier than it is. All right. So really excited to be here today. I feel like over the last year I've had to sort of become an expert on the ITC, but Bob, your presentation still taught me a lot, and I really appreciate it. And I just want to say, I think from my perspective and from Dandelion's perspective, I agree. We're in a new era of geothermal, and I think we've been working hard to scale this technology, but with the options unlocked by the One Big Beautiful Bill last year, we just see a ton of more opportunity to really scale this technology. So I want to talk a little bit about the market that we are targeting and how we're bringing third-party ownership and the ITC to that market. So Dandelion, we've been around since 2017. We've done about 4,000 geothermal heat pump installs. And right now, we're heavily focused on scaling the technology through the new construction market. And so we are partnering directly with production builders and multifamily developers, where we can really bring the costs down to help scale the technology and increase adoption. We've got partnerships across the country. Our key markets are the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, primarily focused in Maryland, but expanding to Virginia, which hopefully I think we'll get to at the next panel. And then all the way out to Colorado, where we're doing a lot of work with home builders in Colorado. This just gives you a few examples of the builders we're working with out in Colorado. We're doing 1,500 homes with Lennar. That was kind of our first big production builder project. It's 14 communities, all electric. That is not a leasing product. That is a straightforward ownership where we partner with Lennar. They buy the technology from us. We're helping them access utility rebates and other incentives, and then they sell the home as they usually would, where the home buyer buys the home and they have the geothermal system installed. The project that's I was going to say circled, squared. The project that has the blue line around it is in Maryland. That's also a Lennar project. It's almost 250 home development, kind of right outside the Washington, D.C. area, and that is a lease product. So this is the first project we've done with a builder since the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, where we were able to work with a third-party owner and bring leasing to that project to help make the economics work. And that project, the economics would not work without leasing, and so I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But really exciting, like we're actually seeing this in the ground now, and these homes are being sold, home buyers are buying them with a lease attached, and what's really exciting is we're not seeing any pushback from home buyers. There's acceptance of the lease when they purchase the home, and they understand the benefits of the system and what it's bringing them, and they understand that the lease is to help really pass through that 40% tax credit benefit for them. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but before we get into the ITC, I think our model with production builders has really been to get our costs down. So we're doing hundreds of homes at a time to really bring our drilling costs down and our heat pump costs down for builders. But we've also been helping them access rebates. And so our core markets really are where there's a lot of housing being developed and where there are rebates that can help offset the cost to builders. And you'll see we leverage things like new construction rebates through utility programs, We leverage geothermal renewable energy credits, which we'll be talking about at the next section. There's a lot of states, as you guys know, that have tax exemptions and sales tax exemptions. There's zoning and code requirements that we help builders manage. And so all of these things in many markets are starting to really push builders to think about all electric and geothermal. But in no market really does this overcome the entire upfront cost hurdle. And that's where we really see third-party ownership coming in and playing a key role to get builders over that hump to really adopt at scale. So I think this is sort of understood, but I just want to talk through specifically for the builder application why third-party ownership is so important, and I think a little bit distinct from a retrofit application. As I said, because we're able to leverage rebates and other incentives for builders, we can get the cost down. But with the housing market that we're under, builders want to bring premium products to their customers, but they're not going to pay more for geothermal. And part of that is because the builder isn't the one that benefits from the system at all. They sell the home and they no longer have any association with the system. The home buyers benefit significantly. 50% reduced operating costs, all the benefits that we in this room know geothermal provides in a home. Electric grid ratepayers benefit massively, all ratepayers, because of the peak demand reduction associated with these deployments at scale, but the builders don't get any of those benefits. And so to expect them to pay additional upfront just isn't what's gonna help scale this market. And so there's, because of this split out, this sort of like challenge of misalignment of the costs and benefits, that's why we worked really hard since July of last year to launch a lease product and bring it to market so that we can actually now get builders to be able to adopt this technology at the same cost as alternative systems, and not only in geographies where there are incentives, right? Now, we can actually get costs down for builders in places like Texas, where a lot of housing is being built, but there's no rebates to help builders adopt. And so it really helps, particularly as we're looking for national builders to adopt this technology, to be able to bring something across geographies to them. So a little bit about kind of where we were and where we are with the ITC. In the past, I think 25D was a really critical and important tax incentive for the retrofit market. 25D was not that helpful in the market that we serve because that residential consumer tax credit went to the home buyer. So when the home buyer purchased a system with geothermal, they could qualify for the tax credit, but it did nothing to help the builder economics. The builder still has to decide to pay and put in the system. And so while it was a selling point for homes, it really didn't impact builder decisions to do geothermal or not do geothermal. And where we are now using the Section 48 tax credit is now we actually can impact the builder decision because what we are able to do now is bring the 30 to 50% tax credit, depending on domestic content and energy communities. We're able to actually bring a third-party owner to take advantage of that tax credit, reduce the cost to the builder, and then shift some of the cost of the system to the home buyer, and really deal with that misaligned incentive problem. So what we've done is we've actually announced 2 partnerships. In the fall of last year, we announced a partnership with Upstream Lease. I think Kelsey's in the room. We worked really hard with Upstream Lease to launch our first product. It's available in the PJM market. Upstream Lease, I think you'll hear from them at the next session, but they're a GREC aggregator, really familiar with helping us and other companies access geothermal renewable energy credits, and they worked with us. We worked together jointly to stand up this lease product. This is the product that Lennar has adopted in Maryland. It's really significant. We found ways to stack rebates, incentives, and the tax credit so that we're looking at really low-cost leases for home buyers. The builder doesn't pay more than a conventional system, and the homeowners are paying, depending on where you are, $10 to $40 a month for a geothermal system. It's really low-cost lease, kind of a no-brainer when you're buying a home to get a premium system at that cost. The second partner we announced just a couple of weeks ago, Diverso Energy. I don't think Tim's in the room. Diverso Energy is our second partner. They are backed by a very large infrastructure investment firm called CVC. And we are launching with them outside of the PJM territory. So this is a product where we can bring to builders in our Colorado market as well as other territories. The products are a little bit distinct. Happy to talk about in kind of Q&A or offline about the details of the products. But now we're able to serve the entire builder market across the country with a third-party ownership product, bringing in capital providers. So rather than talk about the details of our lease product, I wanted to just maybe give everybody a sense of some of the decisions that we had to make along the way as we were trying to figure this out. So obviously the first is identifying a third-party owner. We were able to identify two. At the size the industry is, it's important to find the right investor in these projects. I think it's been said, and I totally agree with Bob, that split ownership makes this, the split ownership problem makes this a bit more challenging. You need to find a partner who's willing to own both the ground loop and the interior heat pump equipment. I think there'd be a lot more partners out there if it was just the ground loop equipment rather than the inside equipment. But that's really important. And then once you identify that capital partner, you have to, of course, figure out the structure. Is it some sort of joint structure with them? Do they have to find a tax equity partner? Are they using the tax equity on their own? Are they transferring or selling the credits? And so there's a lot to figure out to make sure you're finding the right partner to work with. Some of the program design decisions, we talk a lot about leasing, but it's not the only option. It is what we went with these two products that we launched. But there's also a power purchase option, there's services agreements, there's a few different structures you can use under the Section 48 tax credit for residential. And so thinking about what makes the most sense, each have their own requirements. What are the length of the lease agreements? We know it has to at least be 5 years to avoid any ITC recapture. But one of our products is a 20-year lease with buyout options along the way. One of them is a much longer lease for the ground loop. So there's a lot of different options for how you structure this, depending on the needs of your customers. You need to figure out warranty and maintenance. Is the third-party owner going to maintain the system, or do you put that on the home buyer and the homeowner in more of a triple net lease structure? How are you going to deal with non-payment, given that you actually can't go back and take the ground loop out of the equipment? So we got over the IRS rule, but from from someone investing and owning in the system, if they can't go back and take that ground loop, how do you overcome that hurdle is something that's really important. And then the last is just interaction with rebates and incentives, really trying to figure out how do you stack these different rebates and incentives to maximize the benefits for your customers. I mentioned this, but leasing perceptions, I think going into this, I think builders have a right to sort of question, how are home buyers going to respond to this? And I'll just tell you, I think we'll have more data as we go, but so far we've had no challenges from the home buyer perception of the lease. I think we have some builder perceptions and solar leasing perceptions to overcome as we start to launch in the industry. And I look forward to working with all of you as we really scale this product to talk about the benefits of leasing and make it a standard so that we can really make this technology accessible. And with that, I will skip my last slide. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Awesome panel. Okay, your turn. Your turn for questions, please. And Mr. John Chavaco, thank you for helping put this awesome group together. Very diverse, awesome stuff. Okay.
Cassandra John. I'm on the board of CGC. John invited me here today, and it was a good invitation. This has been a great session. Thank you, everyone. My first question I have is for Maggie, and this is around kind of your approach to the market. So right now you're going through builders. Is there a thought to eventually offer a lease that's pretty much a direct-to-consumer, which I understand the concerns about solar leasing and that perception? Is that what you're thinking right now?
Oh, it's on. So just as a company, we don't sell direct-to-consumer, but I don't think that means that a lease product wouldn't work in a direct-to-consumer model. What's different about the builder model is, well, one, it's much cheaper per home to do geothermal in a new construction setting than a retrofit, so it's a lower capital investment per project. And then the second is a builder has to put in an HVAC system in a home no matter what, right? So I think what makes leasing a little bit unique in the builder setting is there can be a builder contribution that helps buy down that lease amount. So I think leasing is totally doable, and I know many are thinking about launching it in more of a direct-to-consumer model, but for us, that's just not the market that we serve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Matt Damaris here from Energy Catalyst. How does the depreciation work because Bob, I believe it was you, Bob, that mentioned that you can get the 100% depreciation. How does that work with a lease? Is it still eligible, and who would be able to claim that? Presumably the leaser, right? Who are
The lessor, right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because it's his stuff. It's his equipment that he uses for his business. So what happens is you now have two choices on depreciation. And we can argue about what is the depreciable life of a geothermal system. That actually turns out to be a debate. Let's just agree for the purpose of this conversation that it's 7 years. Okay, there are people who would say it's 15, but maybe 7, okay? That used to be, by the way, 5% before the Big Ugly Bill was passed, okay? But now it looks like it's 7 or 15. Anyway, so you get a choice. You either depreciate your equipment over, say, the 7-year life,
Yep.
if that's what you want, and you might do that if you don't have a lot of tax appetite, or if you want, you can 100% depreciate it immediately in the first year. And that means that essentially you remove its cost from your tax basis, okay? And so the question then that one typically has is, what is the net present value of doing that, okay? So say you're going to pay, as a corporation, let's say you're going to pay 21% or something as tax, okay? So you're essentially, you're essentially getting that 21% back as though it were an investment in your company, okay? Right. So do you want it back immediately, or do you want to bleed it out over the next, say, 7 years? And in that case, it'd be the same amount of money, but now you've got time value of money, so it would be less. It would be less present value than if you were to do it immediately. Right. Now, whatever you do take in tax credits, though, and this is an important thing, is that you have to deduct 1/2 of the tax credits from the depreciable basis of the system. So, like, let's say you had let's say you got a 50% tax credit, you got a $100,000 system. That means you get a 50%, basically you get a 50%, $50,000 tax credit. You have to deduct $25,000, which is half of the tax credit, from the depreciable basis. So you'd start off with, you'd make a $100,000 investment, you'd get the $50,000 tax credits, and then you deduct $25,000 from your initial cost and depreciate the 75. Does that make sense?
I think I'm following you.
Okay.
Next year, Bob, we're getting a whiteboard, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that would be,
But
you'd
yeah,
be
it's all
monetizing that
pretty
through-
standard stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Very easy run-of-the-mill stuff. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, great question, great answer. All right, who's up next?
Hi, I'm Rajul from NP Environmental. My question is for Kareem or Maggie. Under the third-party ownership model, how are your companies handling default risk?
So I'll answer it from the perspective of what we're doing. I'll pass it over to you, Maggie. So we go to quite a bit of length. First of all, smallest investment size from us is $15 million. So these are fairly large buildings, okay? Where we're coming in for on a $15 million investment, $5 million is probably geothermal, $10 million is probably HVAC, roughly, right? So what we're doing over there is to prevent ourselves from default risk. First and foremost, we typically are either we have a non-disturbance agreement with the lender. So if the building were to go into default, for example, the lender were to step in, our contract is still maintained. Secondly, we do take a security, typically second or third security position, like a lien position on the property itself. And then, of course, there's a lot of underwriting that we're going to do out of the gate, right? So, and last but not least, because these are commercial properties, we do have the ability, not in the winter, but otherwise we do have the ability to turn the system off. So think about it, no ventilation, no cooling, for that matter, no hot water, period, right? So the building's uninhabitable. So we have quite a few levers in place in these larger buildings.
things that I assume you probably don't have as much freedom, but we tend to have quite a bit of freedom in the way that we structure the security aspect of it.
Yeah, this question is a little bit more for the third-party owner than me specifically, how they deal with it. But what I will say, in at least some of our core markets, the lease amounts are very low. So part of dealing with the default risk is monetizing all of these rebates and incentives up front so that the actual dollar value risk to the owner of the system is lower. So that's one thing. And then the only other thing I'll say is on the residential side, there are other consumer protection issues with shutting off a residential heating or cooling system that our third-party owner has to deal with. So have to be really careful about how we do that. But probably a little bit more of a question for our third-party owner than me.
Yeah, when you're talking about default risk here, it's also very important to understand, I think the point that she was hinting at, you're talking about, these are utility payments, okay? And people pay the utilities. The leases, they're effectively the same as a utility payment. You're going to make the payments to keep your heating system running, okay? Whether it's a building or whether it's an individual, even if it's like a poorer individual. Poor individual will pay for the heating before they'll pay for their medicines. They'll pay for the heating before they'll pay for food and things like that. So it turns out that default risk, when you're dealing with a utility-like, life essential stuff, your default risk is much lower than it is in any other kind of credit. So for instance, a normal credit rating, okay, you would typically have, you would think that a person's credit rating for a life essential payment like a utility should essentially be much higher than their normal credit rating. Okay, they might skip out on a loan on some clothes or something like that. They will pay their utility bill. So it turns out default risk, it just isn't as much of a problem in this particular kind of property.
Thank you, Bob. That was helpful. All right, 2 more questions. Thank you.
This is a question for Holly. It was really interesting to hear about that program. Are you all targeting either like the initial pilot or the next larger scale one to be like a non-pipe alternative, either coordinating it with leak-prone pipe retirement or in lieu of gas expansion, just kind of thinking about, you were talking about the risk in not taking action and triggering the gas utility death spiral, and wondering how that's kind of synced up with your gas system planning.
At this point on the standalone GEO, we are not looking at syncing that up with the gas system planning. When we look at TENS, that's where we're finding that to be more applicable. We haven't gotten to the level to really dial in which community makes the most sense. We have started talking to our installers about, where would be good and are we going to prioritize the communities that are really engaged. In Portland years ago, we did a solarized southeast, solarized northeast, and the neighborhoods got really well organized. The more neighbors that signed up, the cheaper your system got. So we haven't decided, are we going to try to incent and do something like that? It was very, very successful in getting solar throughout Portland. But that will be a fun bridge to cross. We just haven't quite gotten there. Thank you.
Very good. Who gets the last question? There's got to be somebody out there. All right. John? No? Okay. In the middle. All right, JT.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to clarify on the default risks on individual homes that the question was pointed earlier. Most third-party owners that are dealing with individual consumer applications on single-family homes, they're going to apply a UCC, a Universal Commercial Code lien on the property. And that's kind of typical for leasing an asset that's tied to a property. So that will help ensure their ability to recover based on Maggie's valid point that in certain states and certain jurisdictions, you can't just shut off somebody's heat. So that gives the third-party owner extra risk management, if you will, on defaults.
Thank you, John. Very helpful. Okay, everybody, can we give this awesome panel a round of applause? All right, that's the conclusion. Thank you very, very much.